We planned this trip last year when we spent all summer in Houston in stifling heat before leaving in early September for Alaska. We decided on a long trip to the Rocky Mountains with Scout and to hold our annual get together with family on Labor Day weekend at the end of the vacation. Little did we know then we would be escaping the hottest summer on record in South Texas. We decided to take our relatively new 2023 Maverick because of its excellent fuel economy and the room to pack everything we wanted in the back and in a compartment that was watertight. This was our longest road trip of our lives, totaling 4,300 miles. To give a sense of that distance, it's equivalent to the straight line distance across the lower 48 states in the U.S. from north to south, plus the distance across the U.S. from east to west. We limited our mileage in one day to 500 miles and tried to take rest stops every 2 hours. For lunch on the road, we would get takeaway sandwiches and then find a nearby park to enjoy our lunch and allow Scout to get some exercise. Scout is an excellent and easy traveling companion. We left on a Sunday morning, August 13th, Samuel's 11th birthday. We left our home in a drought and extended heat wave and had done all we could to try to prepare for the visit. We had a nice visit with family in Bernie, and this shortened the first day drive on our trip. School had started prior to the prior week. Samuel and Izzy were working with Kristen to establish their daily schedules for school and before and after school activities. This was a good start to our trip. First stop was Paladura Canyons south of Amarillo. We had rented one of these glamping tents that were air conditioned, and we stayed there on our first night away, which was Tuesday, August 15th. It was a pleasant stop, and we got fixings for hamburger supper before they closed, and had really a pleasant evening there. The next morning, I took this picture just before sunrise. The bathrooms were a pretty lengthy walk away, so I drove to Sharon to the bathroom and then back. And on the way back, there were a pack of coyotes out, and they were quite loud. It made for an interesting and quick trip down from the parking lot to our glamping site, and a memorable start to the day. This is a shot taken of Paladura Canyon shortly after sunrise from the visitor center. It is a beautiful sight. And this is Scout checking out the view of Paladura Canyon as we start our day towards Estes Park. These are all images taken from our VRBO along the Fall River in Estes Park. The location and the cabin itself were just ideal. It's closer to the entrance of the national park than it was to Estes Park, but still convenient enough to get to the grocery store. It had 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, very well appointed kitchen, and it had a back porch, which I'll show in a little while, where we could cook outside and sit outside and enjoy the beautiful cool weather. There were a number of wild turkeys that came to visit every evening, sometimes in the morning, up to 15. It's Scout looking at them on the couch, which was her lookout point. Also, our very dear friend, Gary Bortz, came to stay with us for 3 days, and we really enjoyed our time with Gary and touring into Rocky Mountain National Park and just catching up and enjoying his company. Next, I'll show you a brief video taken from the back porch, which shows how close we were to the Fall River, which we enjoyed listening to every night with our windows open in the cool mountain air. I'll show a series of slides in chronological order taken during the trip. This first one is of the first morning that we went into the national park, the morning after we arrived, and this is sunrise over Sprague Lake. It's a popular place to go for sunrise, and for good reason. These are the least chipmunks playing around on Sprague Lake. This also was right at sunrise the second morning when we went into the park with Gary Bortz. This day we had dropped Scout with a pet sitter for the first part of the day. This is a young mule deer buck that was posing for us on a little rise. And this is a golden marmot taken on Trail Ridge Road, which is the highest highway in the United States, and into an alpine ecosystem. This is a Clark's nutcracker, again taken on Trail Ridge Road. Here is a bull elk that has just recently lost its velvet on its horns. We were there just prior to the elk rut. On the day after Gary left, which was a Monday, he left on a Sunday. Again, we had a pet sitter scheduled for Scout. We left her first thing in the morning, and then Sharon and I went in on our timed entry. We had timed entry every day that we were there, which is now a feature of trying to control crowds in the Rocky Mountain National Park. At any rate, we went to see some sites that we hadn't seen yet, and this particular picture was taken along the trail. I had headed up ahead and crossed in an area where I wanted to photograph, and Sharon was waiting for me when I came back down the trail, and I shot this picture of her, which I really like. One of the stops we got to, there was this ground squirrel that had learned how to beg, and he went up Sharon's leg a couple of times begging for food. Of course, we didn't feed them, but I got this picture of our friendly and aggressive ground squirrel looking up at Sharon and begging for food. I think at this same stop, I got this picture of the beautiful Steller's jay. The last night, I decided we should go back into the park, and we were headed towards one of our favorite places called Hidden Valley when we saw a number of cars pulled over at one of the turnouts. I pulled over and got out and was told to get back into my car because there was they were going to anesthetize a bull moose, and so I got back in and we just sat, and fortunately where we were sitting turned to be a ringside seat for what happened. They were trying to position so they could tranquilize this bull moose, which is named R7. He had been part of a study for 5 years, and he had a transmitting collar around his neck that they wanted to take off, take some um, blood samples and other vital information, and then release him. And as you can see, if you look closely, he was missing his left eye. And they think that he lost that in a fight because there was no evidence of any infection. Anyway, this is a shot of him as he was browsing, and they were getting in position to tranquilize him. This is a shot of the team working over him after he was tranquilized. It's about 70 to 100 yards from where the tranquilizer was first shot. And you can see the vet working on the moose. And this is a shot taken after he had regained consciousness and was heading out without his tracking collar. It was really quite fun to be able to witness this and watch, our conservation biologist at work helping to study and understand. So our next stop was to head north to South Dakota to Custer State Park. This is a shot of our little cabin on Sylvan Lake. It's much smaller than the VRBO we were in previously, but quite comfortable. There were no cooking facilities inside the cabin, although we did have a small refrigerator, and outside we had a cooking ring, which we used in the evenings a couple times. This is a picture of Sylvan Lake. Our cabin was fairly close to this, and it's just an absolutely gorgeous area. The rock formations are almost otherworldly, and you have a real sense of sort of adventure just walking around, exploring, going through all the little nooks and crannies in these rock foundations. It's just a magical area, at least to my eye, and a popular but not overcrowded place to vacation. I went out to take a night sky um, photograph from just outside of our cabin. Now, unfortunately, there was some area lighting, so it wasn't quite as dark as I would like it to be, but still got a nice shot of the Milky Way, which is basically directly over our little cabin there at Sylvan Lake. One of the first things we did was to take the wildlife loop in Custer State Park, and there's lots of wildlife there, pronghorn, a number of bird species, burros, and a rather large herds of bison. I think in total there's around 1,500, and this is a shot of a part of one of the herds that we took on the day that we went around the wildlife loop. One of the other mammals that are there that are um, very frequently seen in several different places are the prairie dog, the black-tailed prairie dog. We saw 3 or 4 prairie dog towns, and this little guy was close, and they're a lot of fun to observe and watch them cavort around, and just a very playful looking animal. This will show a video I took that Sharon didn't realize I was recording as we're going through one of the tunnels, the narrowest of the tunnels on the Needles Highway, a very beautiful and picturesque drive. This tunnel is only 8 feet wide, which is remarkably narrow for today's vehicles.
Where's this shit?
Well, we can't get out of the car either.
I know. They're getting in a little bitty thing. Okay. Which way? I guess there's only one.
We took one trip, side trip from Custer State Park. We'd taken in several of the other sites in the area in our previous trip there 6 years ago. And this time we went to Spearfish Canyon, and this is a picture of us at Spearfish Falls, which is near the end of Spearfish Canyon. And we enjoyed the drive, although we both decided it wasn't as picturesque as the area that we had left and probably wouldn't do it again. We also went to Deadwood, which is an old lawless mining town, which is now a basically a tourist trap. Not our favorite. They were having a very large auto show while we were there, which was interesting to see all of the classic automobiles and to see them on the way back as they were doing a side tour to Spearfish Canyon. So this is the concert stage set up in downtown Deadwood for what was a 4-day event. While Bill Hickok was killed here while he was in a card game with holding the famous aces and eights hand. Well, we went into a bar that claimed to be the site where he was shot, and I paid the $10 to take the self-guided tour. And the first thing I read was, well, it was in that general vicinity that this occurred. So that my $10 got me into a place that's somewhere near where he was shot, but not necessarily where he was shot. This is a picture shown, and that's what I got for my $10 worth. This is an evening shot I took of near sunset of Sylvan Lake, and then we would come back for the next shot well after sunset to get a night sky picture from the same location. So our next stop was Yellowstone, and where we stayed for 4 days along Yellowstone Lake. The first morning out was quite foggy, and we stopped along the Yellowstone River where this picture was taken in Hayden Valley, just as the fog was starting to break a little bit that morning, and it's just shortly after sunrise. This is above the fog on Dunraven Pass, and you can see that blanket of fog down below, and as we descended the pass, we went back into it. So we were headed for Lamar Valley, which is just filled with wildlife. It's known as America's Serengeti for good reason. This is a picture I took of a pronghorn in Lamar Valley. And not far from where that picture was taken, we had stopped, and Sharon spotted this coyote that was hunting along a pond, and then he or she moved away from the pond and actually closer to where we were located, and I got this picture of the coyote trotting away. One of the more exciting things that we saw in Lamar Valley was a female black colored wolf hunting, and close enough that we could take photographs of them. And someone was also there with spotting scopes. There were some wolf experts, so we had nice conversation and information about this female wolf that was hunting. Her den was not far from there, and at least for us, that was one of the highlights of this day. One day we took what is called the Grand Loop Tour, where we headed west from Yellowstone Lake toward the geyser area. Uh, we were there to see Old Faithful erupt, which I'll show at the end of this slide. And we went across to Roosevelt Lodge, where we had a really delightful lunch, and then south to the canyon area, and then back to our cabin. It was a full day tour. The sights are still magnificent, even this late in the season when schools were all back in. It was very crowded in the geyser area, so much so that it really detracted from it. So um, this picture is looking down from the crest of the lower falls as the Yellowstone um, gets down at the bottom. And next I'll show you a video of the Yellowstone as it's approaching the crest of these falls. This is a shot from further down on the Yellowstone, looking back toward the um, lower falls, where those two uh, previous video and picture were taken. This is a view of the what's called the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone from Artist Point. I think this is called Sapphire Pool. It's a picture that Sharon took of this remarkable feature. Next, I'll show the Old Faithful eruption in its entirety. It's a couple minutes long, but you basically see the entire eruption of Old Faithful. The last time we went to Yellowstone, we stayed in Old Faithful Lodge in the old building, and it's really a magnificent um, piece of architecture built in some 13 months. It's a magnificent place, but not my favorite place to stay there at all, and basically due to the crowds. The buses leave at start backing and getting positioned to leave around 5 a.m. So you hear those outside your windows, and it's you're staying in a huge tourist attraction, and the crowds are milling through all the time. So it's not my favorite place to stay at all. Although It is a beautiful place. It's just way too crowded to be enjoyable place to stay, at least for me. This is a shot that I took just before dawn as we are leaving on one of our last outings in Yellowstone. This is uh, across Yellowstone Lake to the what's actually the edge of the caldera that you can see right before sunrise. This was shot on the Yellowstone River in the Lamar Valley. This bull bison had just finished giving himself a dust bath in the side of the river and came up to graze when I got this picture of him. Just to show it's not all mammals, this is a pine siskin uh, we took a picture of. And red-tailed hawk that was soaring over us um, while we were at Yellowstone. So from Yellowstone, we headed out um, for an intermediate stop at Scotts Bluff. This is a picture taken there in the evening once we arrived. Scotts Bluff was an important uh, passage point and milestone of the settlers as they were going along on the Oregon Trail. Really quite a beautiful bluff and site. Scott was the name of a fur trapper, and he was left here by his companions because he couldn't travel any further. They went out fur trapping, and when they got back to this location, they found Scott had died and found his bones, and they named the bluff after him. This is actually further west at Guernsey, Wyoming, and this is a cut called Guernsey's Cut that was made by the covered wagons as they were moving up from the Platte River through this formation, which was relatively um, easily eroded, and this is the tracks made and the groove cut by thousands of wagons going west on the Oregon Trail. And this is just a picture south of Norton showing an old farmhouse. This wasn't the settlers that originally come here, but this is their descendants, and they're a big part of our history. And I liked including that picture in this um, presentation. So the last stop was for the family get together. We spent 3 days in Norton uh, at a VRBO on State Street, which turned out to be an excellent place for us to stay because we had more time for visiting and visiting in a more natural setting. We spent some time with Sharon's first cousin, Linda Donovan, and her husband, Pat, and my friend Jerry and his wife, Laura Darling. But the first day was at Almena at Lynette's house where this picture was taken. She did what has now become our um, tradition, which is a chicken and noodle feed. And that's all of us actually in the same place that we take a picture every year. And this was taken in the VRBO The following day, the day before we left, um, of everyone but Lynette, and she didn't come up to Norton. The last night that we were there, Garth and I had gone out earlier in the day and looked for a place to get some night um, photography in before the moon came up, which was about 10:15 that night. So this is a shot looking south, and if you look in the left-hand sky, you can see the Big Dipper, and its two stars are pointing out the North Star, which is right over Norton. Interesting thing happened about the time that I took, shortly after I took this shot, and I'll show you something else to look at while I tell that story. Garth and I were repositioning, and I saw a string of lights in the sky, and at first I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't understand what it possibly could be. There were 30 or 40 equidistant lights. There was no sound, and they were moving across the sky, and then they would disappear about what would be a 1 o'clock position if straight up was noon. As it turns out, it was a Skylink train of satellites at their shallow Earth orbit before they repositioned them further up for use. But not knowing what it was really a strange sight to behold, one of the most remarkable things I've ever seen, and both Garth and I were really excited to get back and tell everybody and then try to figure out what it was. This is a shot of the Milky Way over a windmill south of Norton. And I'll bring this to a close with some shots of Scout. We wondered about this. We knew she was always good for traveling, but she turned out to be much better for the trip than we would have ever imagined. We had lots of conversations with different people because of Scout. Wherever we would stop, people would come up and want to pet her, and that would start a conversation, and she was very additive to the trip. Now, in the national parks, we couldn't take her on the trails everywhere else we could, and she loved it. She loved every part of this. She loved hunting ground squirrels and uh, turkeys and anything else she could find, and she was really a delight to have and very additive to our trip. When we would go out to eat in the evenings, she was quiet and we didn't need to worry about that. And Scout was just the best of traveling companions and added much to our escape the heat vacation.